Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Kairos Fateweaver of Tzeentch and how Creative Assembly could actually easily fix this campaign. Because believe it or not, Tzeentch does actually have a good amount of power available to them. While they may lack the sheer amount of melee potential of Slaanesh or Khorne, and also the durability of Nurgle units, they do Tzeentch does have a good amount of versatility because you do have the barrier and the survival aspect that the barrier does provide. The recharging barrier that, you can recharge during the middle of battles. You do have access to range units that can be incredibly powerful when we're talking about the battlefield. You have versatility with your flying units, with your monstrous units. So there's a lot of things to actually like about Tzeentch. However, despite that, Kairos' campaign is pure freaking misery to actually deal with. But why is that? Why does Kairos have such a terrible campaign to deal with? Well, for starters, the units you actually want to recruit as Tzeentch are melee units. You don't want to bother with things like blue horrors or pink horrors. You might bother with exalted pink horrors, absolutely. You might bother with things like the flamethrowers, but what you really want to do is to get the many eye tributes and to get things like Forsaken of Tzeentch and Sangor. So you want to get rid of this very, very quickly. But the real problem, one of the first real issues that you will encounter in a Tzeentch campaign is the issue of casualty replenishment. Tzeentch has a weird situation with casualty replenishment, a really bad situation with casualty replenishment. Keep in mind, I'm using a mod here to reduce the amount of casualties I'm taking in Not Resolve, and I'm still taking a significant amount of damage. Though, to be fair, blue horrors are just pretty bad units with respect to that in a campaign. But the problem is, your casualty replenishment is just, well, in a lot of ways, frankly, non-existent. You have very few ways of increasing casualty replenishment in a campaign as Kairos Fateweaver, and it says something about the Changeling, that the first thing that the Changeling can research is a way to increase casualty replenishment flat out by 10%. And even 10% is not going to be great. You want to get to at least 20%, 30% in a campaign, but 20% basically, you get that first research, you go deal with Festus, you get that 20%, and then you'll replenish pretty quickly. You can get 5% casualty replenishment in a campaign. That is pretty bloody pathetic. There's something just incredibly wrong with Tzeentch and the way casualty replenishment does work. See, this is not a Slaanesh situation. Slaanesh has issues with casualty replenishment, and yes, you can get an additional 8% for Forsaken of Tzeentch and Spawn of Tzeentch, let's call that. But even then, it's not a great situation, even for just those units. But this is not a Slaanesh situation. See, with Slaanesh, you understand why the casualty replenishment is really bad. Because in Slaanesh's case, a lot of the units Slaanesh has are just low armor units that take a significant amount of damage. Tzeentch's units, while there are certainly plenty of units that have low levels of armor, including the ones I started here, there's also tons of units in the Tzeentch roster that will just replenish very slowly and take a lot of damage, even though they have high levels of armor. So things like Forsaken and Sangors, they do have a high level of armor. Sangors have a silver shield with 80 armor, and then we look at things like Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch, we look at Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch, Halberds, Chosen of Tzeentch, all that. So it is bizarre that Tzeentch takes so much damage and replenishes so slowly. I think the problem is with the barrier, the way the damage is calculated and the way replenishment works with the barrier. I'm not entirely certain on this, but regardless, there's just something really odd with Tzeentch, because not only is your base casualty replenishment really bad, but also there's that situation where even 10% casualty replenishment that Changeling literally starts with after turn 1 is just not going to be great enough. The fact that you need like 20-30% to be in a comfortable zone, like many campaigns would kill to have the first thing they research fly out 10% casualty replenishment. There's just something really, really odd with Tzeentch's units, and I'm pretty certain it has to do with barrier, but I'm not certain about this. So that was one of the issue. How do you fix this? You change the way casualty replenishment works. If there's an issue with the barrier, you change that. And really, you just give Tzeentch flat out 10%, 15% casualty replenishment. Yes, I would buff it with a changeling to make it good. You'd still, by the way, be fighting manual battles even with 15% because, well, the auto-resolve is what is. But at least you wouldn't have this pain and misery that you might have to endure otherwise in a Kairos campaign. That is the first issue, and arguably the most significant one. But no, we're not stopping there. No, we're just starting there. The other issue that we have in the Tzeentch campaign is your economy is, to say pathetic would be an understatement. You start with an 100 income building that also generates some growth. Now, if you have strong winds of magic, and you can get strong winds of magic, it's 150. 150 is not particularly great. It isn't the worst ratio I've seen. I've seen far worse. Kislev, I'm looking at you 1,000 for 100. And the fact that you can get up to 150 if you have winds of magic, that's good. But you can't trade if you're playing a Tzeentch campaign, so your economy is going to end up feeling incredibly limited from the very beginning of the campaign experience. Furthermore, while Tzeentch can eventually end up getting a good campaign experience, a good economy, the way you do so is not particularly great. You get warp lymphs in every settlement. In a major settlement, you get the library. Okay, so you get 30% in every settlement. You stack it up in a province like this, it's 120% income because you can get those strong winds of magic, and that's how you get a good economy as Tzeentch. Suffice to say, though, having an economy that's reliant on you not only just building an economic building, but also building modifier buildings is ridiculous. I also find it personally absurd the fact that you have all these resource systems that only give you 15%. This should be significantly higher, or maybe that resource buildings should generate income on their own. The fact they don't is ridiculous, because yeah, 15% versus 30%, the 30% is going to win. Now, the grimoires are all well and good, but I'm going to prioritize the building that's going to give me fly out 15% and maybe up to 30% as opposed to just a building that gives me grimoires. The grimoires are not really that particularly important anyway, I would have to argue. So what exactly are you going to achieve with that? Then we have the changing of ways, a meaningless mechanic that achieves very, very little. Okay, there are some situations in which you might use this to your advantage, all that. So for instance, if I were to change this, if I were to go to the changing of ways and switch this element to the flaming scribes, that would possibly create complications for various factions, but it isn't really a great dynamic, is it, when we're talking about that? So yeah, not particularly great to deal with in general, I would argue. Like, maybe I can, get the flaming scribes to join in the fun against Heckless over here if I were to use that. But a lot of these abilities are just not really that useful, and they're locked behind research. The teleporting ability that you can get through a lot of like way of war, way of manipulation, fire, and all that, that's useful, absolutely. Some other things are useful, like income from sacking and looting settlements, but a lot of these things that are unlocking the changing of ways just kind of meaningless, like, ooh, I can track an army, I can reveal the shroud, I can borrow time. It's just not particularly, like, yeah, restoring an army's movement range is useful, opening the gates kind of, breaking alliance could be as well, though there's ways to abuse that anyway. Point is, a lot of these things just don't feel that meaningful. Like, they might have felt meaningful to Creative Assembly when they were designing Realms of Chaos. They certainly aren't meaningful in a campaign as Immortal Empires. Partly because they're incredibly expensive, so that's one of the issues. Like, yeah, I can transfer this to the Flaming Scribes, but it's still not going to be a great situation. I've just literally prevented Heckless from taking over that particular settlement, by the way. So that is kind of the issue here. So issues with casualty replenishment, issues with economy, changing of ways not feeling particularly meaningful. Also, the faction effect that Kairos has is just like freaking pathetic. Ooh, your hero action success chance is 15%. Who the hell uses heroes, your limited heroes, which are much more useful in battle? Who the hell uses them for hero actions nowadays? Oh, battle reinforcement time. Maybe in some cases that's good, though, considering how Tzeentch's army works. Like, yeah, I guess it could be useful in some cases, but yeah, in a lot of ways, it's just not that great. Like, Kairos is a great lord. He's got a lot of power, but his faction, his race, his faction effect's just meaningless. Like, why the hell would you play a campaign as Kairos as opposed to Changeling? That's not to say Kairos can be made better if the economic potential was higher, if the casualty replenishment was higher, if the changing of ways actually meant something and wasn't locked behind research. It wouldn't be quite as miserable of a campaign experience, but you have to deal with all of those. And that is a problem. And look, I can harp on about the issues N'Kari has in a campaign, for instance, but here's the thing. While N'Kari absolutely has enormous issues in their campaign, N'Kari has a substantially better economy and a substantially better campaign dynamic because, yeah, the early game is brutal and annoying, but once you get past that, you've kind of won the campaign because of your vassals. You can vassalize for diplomacy as Kairos, but only through diplomacy, which is obviously not quite the same as subjugation or all the other useful tools that Slaanesh does have. So that's the problem. Kostin signing out.